Hey guys, we're the Accidental President Book Club, and we're going to be doing a podcast for you guys, answering a couple quick questions. For the summary of our book, it starts off introducing Truman's life and then his first 4 months as president. Kind of introducing who he was growing up and how he even got into this insane instance of him becoming president. And then during his presidency, it goes through some of the major events there, like the ending of World War II, the ending of the Japanese War, and the use of the atomic bomb. So that's the summary. And then for the thesis of the book, the author really tried to drive home this point that it wasn't about if Truman was a good or a bad president, but the fact that he was an accidental president. It was so odd and so crazy for Truman to even be in this place. So let's get into some questions.
Question 1 is, how did Truman's early life during his early presidency influence his rise and his actions during the presidency?
Well, he grew up on a farm, and he was taught, he was a hard worker, so he was taught resilience. And so I think whenever he became a president, it helped him, relate to ordinary, normal Americans. So I think that was better for him because he related to how normal Americans are today.
Yeah, I think there was so much of his early life that led up to him becoming president and how he would act during his presidency. From a young age, he really loved to read. He worked on a farm. He was like the most ordinary man you could find in Missouri working on a farm. But he loved to read. At one point, he was bedridden with an illness at a very young age, and he just sat there reading political books like all day, every day. And he learned to love great leaders of the past. So that really influenced his want to be in politics, even though it didn't seem realistic for a farmer in Missouri. And then he also was a very hardworking man, like you said. Working on a farm, making ends meet when it looked like they'd have to sell the farm. There was a lot of resiliency in Truman.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, I think he learned pretty early on that he was going to take lots of risks, but failure is something that I think came pretty naturally to him, but something that he knew was going to keep happening, but he knew that he could get through it, and that was continuous for him.
I feel like his time in the military really affected his decisions with the atomic bomb and any war policies. And on top of it, it also taught him a lot about being honorable. So anytime he needed to be honest, he would always be honest.
And I would say Truman about dropping the atomic bomb in Japan would be a big influence into the war because after Roosevelt's death, he had to take over as president, and it wasn't like a choice, he had to be the president.
Kind of circling back to him being on a farm and being hardworking, discipline really came into play with Truman and in his presidency, especially with his Truman doctrine and talking about resisting communism and acting as the kind of like the leader in that, but kind of putting his foot down almost and getting that firm hand, I guess.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
I kind of wanted to add on to what Ashton said about you mentioning that he was really honorable, because back when he was working in Missouri, at a point in time he was a court judge, and he was in a very corrupt Kansas City political machine.
Yeah.
And they said he was one of the most honest, true men in there, which I thought was just so shocking, and that definitely bled into his presidency. He wasn't as corrupt as other members in politics at the time.
All right, on to the second question. What were some of the major challenges or conflicts that Truman faced, and do you think he handled them well?
I mean, he went through several major challenges. But the main ones that the book drove home were the ending of World War II and trying to figure out how to split up the occupation in Germany. That was a point of contention because Russia was really saying, we want all of Germany if we could. And it was hard for him to fight back on that. But also, he had to deal with the Potsdam Conference, which was the gathering between the three big leaders. And again, Russia was not Russia throughout the whole book was the annoying sibling.
I was going to say that.
Yeah. They wouldn't agree with anything America or Britain was trying to do. So constantly Truman was trying to have to say, we're going to do this. You guys have to listen. And then in addition to that, the ending of the war in Japan and the use of the atomic bomb. I mean, those were like huge struggles he had to deal with. And most of these he handled pretty well, I'd say, for being a new president. When he had to deal with splitting up Germany, he was firm with Russia, which Roosevelt hadn't been in the past. At the Potsdam Conference again, he was firm with Russia. And he probably could have done some things better, because at the same time I feel like his firmness and hard truth telling with Russia might have split the disunion between America and Russia even further, kind of leading into the Cold War. So he probably could have handled that better. And then obviously the atomic bomb is like a huge point of conflict. You know, it's like, should he have dropped it? Should he not have?
Yeah.
I personally think he made the best decision that he could have at the time with the information he had at the time.
Absolutely.
But yeah, there was an overall good handling of those things.
I think something maybe not as like big, but when he, before presidency, dealing with like contractors, with them giving money back to like the politicians, I think that really like made him understand where his honesty needed to lie throughout his career. But without that, I don't think maybe he would have had that like perspective.
I feel like one of the biggest challenges he faced was becoming Supreme Court and escaping like the corrupt Kansas City political schemes with like Pendergast, and he had to like become a president in the middle of the war, which was also very difficult, and let alone for it to be a war of that size. It made it very hard with him having to make the choices about the nuke and how to split up Germany.
Well, and with him not knowing anything previously.
Yeah,
like
and also
David
him
Byrne.
not knowing the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
Too. That was a very big problem with what he had to overcome.
So I would say like Truman, like what she said, there would be a lot of challenges, like a bomb dropping in Japan and taking Japan out of the war, and like having a different war with Stalin and the Soviet Union, and personally for me, like Truman, I think he handled it well, making those decisions and everything, dropping a bomb in Japan, taking out of the war, and then helping the U.S. and making them enter the war.
Back to like the Potsdam conference. When he was at the conference, he was receiving updates about the atomic bomb testing, and when they finally successfully tested it, I think it gave him like a wave of confidence to kind of put Stalin in his place. You know what I mean? Because I don't think he would have been as firm if we didn't know that the atomic bomb was working and that it was an actual threat. So.
What she said. I mean, he wasn't president for very long, and he already had the biggest decision of his life to make. You know, does he drop the atomic bomb on Japan, even though they already said they're going to surrender, or not? Because you may not be able to trust them. They might just be bluffing and have another attack. So I mean, I know a bunch of innocent lives were. You know, a bunch of innocent people died, but I think he did what he had to do is for best, just make sure they did surrender.
All right, for the third question, it's how did Truman's presidency differ from Roosevelt's? And do you think that this was for the better or the worse?
I think Roosevelt's was very organized in a way that it was like, it was all about him. And I think Truman kind of made it about like, let's all collaborate, let's all like do your job to aid me, essentially. And I think Roosevelt's was a little less maybe like practical or like modest a little. But yeah, I think Truman just incorporated everyone in his cabinet.
I feel like Roosevelt was a lot more like connected with the public and a lot more friendly, while Truman was a lot more blunt and strict on what he wanted and was very direct with anything that he did. He wanted to make sure that it was done and that it was done the right way, instead of trying to make sure that it's what the public wants. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's good or bad, because there's some things that his like decision making was a little bit too much, or some things where he wasn't with the public enough. Go ahead.
The difference between Roosevelt and Truman is like Roosevelt, I feel like he was a super chill person, whilst Truman, I feel like he was mean, like what Ashton said, like strict, mean, everything. Like mostly to Japan, even though Japan wanted to surrender, like they still wanted Japan to be out of the war. And then they had a debate during the Potsdam Conference, and as well as the Manhattan Project, to make a debate on whether U.S. should be in the war or not.
It kind of goes back to like him being a farm worker in a middle class, like in a like a family low wage and stuff. I don't think he was more mean as he was just blunt and like brutally honest to people. FDR was more of a emotional appeal person. He emotionally appealed to everyone, him and his like fireside chats and stuff like that, while Truman himself represented more of the hardworking middle class people and kind of had more of their support through his presidency and like the war itself.
Yeah, if I could interject right there,
Yeah, go ahead.
there was a quote in the book that said that FDR was the people's president, and then Truman was the people,
Right.
He was just one of the people where FDR related or spoke to the people type of thing.
Well, and even with like the fireside chats with FDR, he wasn't like, obviously he was disabled, so that was like a big no-no for them at their time. He couldn't really be out and talk to people, so that was his way of like talking to people through the radio. Truman actually went out and campaigned, and he went to different spots, even during his presidency and during the war. He went out to Oregon and some other places and spoke with some of his older friends. So.
Oh yeah, I agree with what you say. The reason that I think Truman was the way he was during presidency is just because that's how he just grew up in his time. He was a farmer, so I think that's why he's just pretty strict, right to the point. Unlike Roosevelt, where he spoke to the people, and then Truman was trying to be one of the people while speaking to the people.
Yeah. I think another distinction is the difference between Truman and Roosevelt and how they managed the White House and the different political offices. Roosevelt was always very relaxed in those situations. It said that during cabinet meetings he would just tell stories and he would let it lag on for hours and hours. There was no structure to it. And then Truman came in and he said, we're gonna have structure now. We're gonna get this done. We're gonna talk about this, and we're not gonna waste time. Which I think was what America kind of needed at the time.
Yeah.
In a way, we were closing out the war with,
Or trying to.
yeah, on the European front and on the Japanese
Right.
front. And you can't really get things done when you're just talking and having a good time during meetings. So that was one difference, and I agree with what all y'all said about how Roosevelt was a much more bigger, magnificent figure, and Truman was just like your regular farmer, middle-class guy. It said that when he was in the White House, he would just ask staff to refer to him by his first name.
Yeah.
And he didn't want any of the grandeur. He didn't even want to be called Mr. President. So I think that says a lot about his
Well,
character.
even when,
Yeah.
when the first ladies were moving in and out, and how Eleanor Roosevelt had to get 20 moving trucks to get all of her stuff out, and the Trumans had one.
Yeah.
I mean, the sheer amount of wealth Roosevelt's had throughout their presidency. I mean, even Truman was excited about his new wage from VP to president.
Yeah.
So it just shows that big gap between the two people.
Right. Yeah.
All right. How did Truman handle U.S. relations with Russia throughout the book? How did this compare to how Roosevelt handled the relations, and do you think he handled them well?
I feel like, again, it's kind of similar with him being a lot more strict than Roosevelt. Again, Roosevelt was friendly towards the Russians and was trying to integrate them into their policies, while Truman was, no, you can't have the land no matter what you want. It's too much land. It needs to be divided up between everybody, not just you have it all. And he was very strict about that.
Yeah, but Ashton said Truman being with Russia, I feel like they could have been better as a team when they were fighting in the war against the Soviets, because I feel like they would be a good team, and then they could beat out the Soviets. And then Roosevelt, on the other hand, I feel like he would just not do nothing at all. He would just make all of his his troops do all the work, and then I think he didn't Roosevelt didn't handle it well, but because I feel like he didn't know what to do during the war. As for Truman, I feel like he knew exactly what he had to do in the war, and I feel like ended up winning the war.
Yeah, especially with how disciplined Truman was. He kept relations pretty well, like the beginning of the book, as he became president with Russia and Stalin. They were pretty like neutral, but as the war started to kind of drag closer, and even with Stalin learning about the A-bomb and them not telling him, that distrust kind of stirred tensions. And then with the Truman Doctrine and that containment stuff, that kind of just acted more aggressively towards communism and kind of almost attacking Stalin in a verbal way, I guess, or a policy way. So,
Well, I believe Truman handled. I think Truman did a better job with the Russia stuff than Roosevelt, because Truman knew he knew for a fact you can't trust Stalin. It's just not a trustworthy person because he killed millions and millions of people too. Roosevelt, on the other hand, he may have been getting manipulated a little bit, thinking he can trust Stalin, and so I think it makes better that Truman was president at this time, because who knows what would have happened to our country if Roosevelt would have continued to trust Stalin.
Yeah, I think for Roosevelt, it was always about how can we make a relationship with Russia? How can we get them on our side, when in reality, Russia wasn't willing to make that relationship. Like, before Roosevelt died, he had the Yalta Conference with Britain, Russia, and America, their main leaders. And they basically set up agreements. One of the main ones was that Russia couldn't have Soviet control over Poland. And immediately, like right after that, Russia came in and took over Poland and Austria and almost all of Eastern Europe. So as much as Roosevelt really wanted this relationship to happen, Truman, I think like everybody said, did not. Like he was like, it's not gonna happen. And I think he was much more level-headed. He was clear-cut with Stalin. He said, this is what has to happen, which was really good. I think is what we needed at the time.
Yeah, I agree.
Put it in the corner.
Yeah, it even said that he would read like thousands of documents before every meeting just to make sure he understood what was happening. Or he would bring in so many different advisors. He would work really closely with, I think his name was Stimson, who was, he was the ambassador to Russia, maybe.
You're on the right track, I think.
Stimson formed the UN. He helped form the UN.
Yes.
Yes, and he had a close connection with Russia.
Yes.
But yeah, it was always about bringing in advisors for Truman. And he would send in his own advisors to go talk to Stalin personally, people that he knew Stalin trusted, which was good. It just always came up short, I think, was the problem. And as much as he wanted to make it work with Russia, it never was gonna. We ended up in the Cold War with Russia. And I don't think he could have stopped that, honestly.
No.
So,
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I feel like you did a really good job about going into detail about like the papers specifically. Like he just like, he was so much more aware, I think. But yeah.
So what did you learn to be Truman's overall character and like throughout the book? And give me an example of where it was important.
I feel like Truman's character, like at the beginning, he was like aggressive because of making all those decisions during the war, and then like towards like the middle and end, I feel like he was a better president because like he made good choices and the right decisions on like the atomic bomb, Potsdam Conference, the Manhattan Project, and like what had to be done during the war, making the U.S. enter the war, giving him a chance, as well as the Soviets, Russians, Stalin, Stimson, like, and then all the three leaders, Truman, Stalin, and Stimson, clashing in the war, and then I felt like that was a big influence during the war.
It kind of goes back, like every one of my answers goes back to him being like this metal-masked, like hardworking man. He was pretty humble when he accepted the presidency. He accepted a huge responsibility and he didn't like overreact about it. He wasn't like super happy, like, oh, I deserve this. Oh, I'm so much better than FDR. He just accepted it and kind of went on and just tried to do things for the people. He threw that party, but it wasn't like a crazy party. You know what I mean? It wasn't too much. So, I mean, And he didn't really pretend to be ready for it either. You know what I mean? Some people would say like, oh, like I accept this like humbly, but they come and do their own policies, or I'm kind of leading on here. I guess kind of like to end my little section. He was really honest, so he didn't lie to the face of people. He was, even if it like wasn't like favorable about the public, or if the public didn't like want to hear it, he still told the truth. And
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You know, unlike some other presidents we've had, you know, that would lie straight to our faces. He did not do that at all. He was straightforward. He never lied to, not that I know of, lied to any of the U.S. people. I think he wasn't arrogant. He was just a very confident person. You know, made the right decisions, even if it was costing people's lives. It's just what had to be done. So,
Yeah, I think my answer is similar to yours in that he was just like an ordinary guy.
yeah.
Like, I think this was also like the point that the book was trying to drive home through all of it. It was their thesis. He's an ordinary man. He should have never been president. He was an accidental president for a reason.
A farmer became president. It's really
It was
what the whole
the-
book is.
I mean, actually, if you really read the book, it was like the craziest circumstances that he became a president. He was like having multiple failing businesses. He was supposed to have to sell his farm. Then he randomly became a county judge in Kansas City
Yes.
because a friend randomly mentioned it to him. He gained everybody's trust. He built roads in Kansas City. He went on to become a senator, which was also unlikely, but Tom Pendergast kind of, he had schemes. He was a corrupt man. He made it happen. And then he got reelected a second time without Pendergast, and that kind of cemented that people liked Truman. And then he became VP by the most unnormal circumstances ever. It was the night of the DNC convention where Franklin Roosevelt basically came up to him and said, "Will you run with me?" And he did not want to. He refused like 100 times, and he kind of commanded him to at the end of the day. So that's how he became president. I just want to interject that. But when it comes to his character, he was just an ordinary man. He was humble, he was honest, he was calm and level-headed. For me, an example that shows this is that when he became president and he started working in the White House, there was this woman who always curtsied when he came out of his office. And he told her, stop, like, just stop. I do not want anything to do with that. And she was like, okay. But that was normal for every president.
Right, yeah.
That was normal for Roosevelt. And Truman said, I just want to be your average guy. I want you to call me by my first name. I want us to have a normal relationship, even though you might be the highest official in this part of the military. And I think that's something I really liked about him.
I think also because of how honest he was and how much like of a humble background he was very practical and real in his decision making. And I feel like that's maybe something that other presidents have lacked, but I think just because of his background, that like really played into his just like practicality of his presidency and everything he did.
I would say he was also very loyal to like who was close to him, because when he became vice president, he was very concerned about how his family would deal with it, and the press targeting towards his family, especially with the previous first lady being very, very outspoken. He was afraid that his wife was going to get involved into politics when she did not want to. And another example of him being very loyal is when Tom Pendergast died, he still went to his funeral, even though he would face backlash for him being a corrupt government official. Even though, because like his getting to the Senate with Tom Pendergast already had enough controversy, him going to the funeral while the vice president, he didn't care what other people thought and went anyways because he was his friend.
Alright, and our final question would be, after reading the book, do you feel like Truman is well known or celebrated as he should be?
I think he should definitely be as well known as he should be. Just with everything he's done, all the decisions he made, and just the critical thinking that he expressed throughout his presidency. Obviously, being celebrated as he should be is more controversial. Definitely talking about the A-bomb and even the firebombs bombing Tokyo and stuff, and all the killing. So it can go back and forth. I think it's a big situational it just depends on the person, how you personally feel about what kind of went on, because the war really influenced his whole presidency. So
I don't believe he's talked about enough as he should be, because he pretty much ended World War II. You know, I mean, I know, like y'all said, that he did end innocent lives because of his decision in Japan, but at the time, that's what needed to happen, you know? I mean, if he didn't do that and Japan, you know, bluffed and ended up not surrendering, who knows where we would be at. So I think he needs to be talked about more, because when you think of U.S. presidents in our history, you think of, you know, the basic, like George Washington, Abe Lincoln, Freddie Roosevelt, whatever. I think he needs to be in that conversation, because he made a very important decision that impacted our lives.
I'm kind of leaning similar to that. I think he's obviously pretty well known, but I think his name is wrapped around the atomic bomb too much.
Yeah.
Like we're just pinning him on this one maybe bad decision he made, when there were so many good decisions he made. I mean, he was the one who led us out of World War II, even if Roosevelt might have orchestrated that a bit more. So he's talked a lot about in history. He probably could be talked about more. I think for me, growing up, I didn't hear much about his name.
Yeah.
So this book like opened my eyes a lot.
Yeah.
Same here actually.
Yeah. I would recommend it to people like highly if you want to know more about him. But then when it comes to celebrating him, I think the book mentioned he was ranked in like the top 10 presidents.
Yeah.
And I would probably put him in there. Like I think that seems accurate. I think he could be celebrated a little bit more, because I don't think everybody knows his story. But it's probably right around where it should be, like you had mentioned.
To interject, I think it is more centered around the A-bomb than anything else. Not even like the ending of the war. It's just, he dropped this bomb and killed all these people.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's from childhood. I knew that fact and literally nothing else. So this book kind of really opens that up.
And I think there's so much more to his story, because this book only encompasses the first 4 months
Right.
of his presidency, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, for it to be a big book like this, it's,
I know. Yeah.
No, I agree. Growing up, I literally only heard his name attached to the bomb, which I think there's just so much controversy around his name that I agree with you. I don't think much of his like accomplishments necessarily were acknowledged outside of that, or really like outside of any of them.
You know, depending if you think he should be celebrated is really just depending on how you thought about how the war was handled during that time. I mean, outside of the book, he did desegregate the military. I feel like that's not appreciated enough and celebrated, but throughout the book, it just depends on your own opinion about what he was doing and how you felt about his policies.
And then for as Truman as celebrated, I would say like it was basically what the type of man he was. Like, he took responsibility for his actions, admitted his honesty about what he did in the war, and him dropping the atomic bomb, making the right decisions in the war onto Japan, and then leading the U.S. into the war was like a big influence. Like, yeah.
All right, that's all we got for you guys, but thanks for watching. Highly recommend this book, personally. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I would recommend it.
If you want to learn more about Truman, then you have to check out the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.